And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and I am changing all the commanders for all of my commander decks, or so it seems. I've been doing it a lot lately for a variety of reasons. So this video, I will be talking about the reasons I have swapped out a lot of my commanders, which is really important for deck building strategies and stuff like that. Also, for the people that are just curious about my own personal decks, this will be a video to catch up on. And typically I just do my personal decks video once a year. I did mine already this year back in March, but there has been so many changes recently to my personal decks, mostly with the swapping out of commanders, that I thought I would do an update video because I just can't wait until, next year. There's going to be too much to talk about in the next video. And most of it is me just swapping out commanders for decks I already had. I have talked about the different methods for deck building, right? This is part of the important overall topic of discussion for deck building in the commander format, where if you have, say, a method 1 deck, what I refer to as a method 1 deck is I'm very much building around my commander. I need it in play. If you're playing a method 2 deck, you're not really building around your commander that much. Your commander just fits the theme of what you're doing, but your deck can still run fairly well without it. And if you're building that strategy, and most of my decks, I would say, are a method 2 deck, especially the more recent ones, which I have been building, that means that it's pretty easy for you to swap out a commander that, maybe there's a new commander that just came out that happens to fit better, or maybe you just switched up the strategy a little bit. And again, a lot of these things will apply to what I'm talking about with my own personal decks. I'll be using them essentially as examples of what I'm talking about. So let's start out with my Arthus deck, which is no longer my Arthus deck. And this is why, again, I reference my personal decks a lot in my videos. That's why I like to do this stuff, so that people are like, hey, what's he talking about? His Eddie Lonesome Eyebot deck? What's that? In fact, I think I might have even referenced it in a video recently. Yes, I switched commanders for that deck. The purpose of that deck was more first of all, obviously it's a colorless deck, but also it was a proliferate theme. I used Arthus as the commander because, of course, the proliferate there works the +1/+1 counters. But what I didn't love about it, and in fact, my initial evaluation of that commander was correct in that the manifestation and the +1/+1 counters, they just don't go good together. And what I ended up doing in that deck, I did find some interesting ways to use the manifest, but at the end of the day, the manifest did not work good with the +1/+1 counter theme. It didn't work with the proliferate, didn't work with any of that. So I actually had this other thing I was doing in my deck that didn't synergize with the main thing I was doing in my deck. And I've talked about this before, where you have these two things that don't synergize, or you have this thing that works with this other thing, but then it works with this other thing, but that last thing doesn't work with the first thing, and that's where you can get into some trouble. And the manifest in that deck just did not work well with the proliferate, so I switched to Eddie Lonesome Eyebot from Fallout, which is just caring about the proliferate theme, right? 3-mana legendary artifact creature robot, 2/1 with flying. Whenever you attack, if the number of attacking creatures is greater than the number of quest counters on Eddie, put a quest counter on it. So of course, if he just attacks alone, he's got no counters on him yet, you put a counter on him. And that's all I need, of course, because I'm in a proliferate theme. I mean, I could put more counters on them, but because I'm proliferating, that's the main purpose of the deck. Having a commander that all it cares about is proliferating is really handy. And also, it's an assist. Again, this is the kind of commander I like with a method 2 deck, which of course this deck is. This deck, the whole purpose of this deck is proliferating essentially alt win cons like my Darksteel Reactor or my Millennium Calendar, right? I got all these unique win cons, Strixhaven Stadium. There's actually quite a few, right? That's the main purpose of the deck, and I don't want to get too far away from that. Eddie fits the theme of that strategy. And also, I can pay 2, sacrifice him, draw a card, then draw an additional card for each quest counter on him. So he's an assist there. He's a great card draw in the command zone that I can use. So he fits the proliferate, and also he's helping me get to my goal. I mean, obviously, card draw always is going to help you get to your goal in any commander deck. So that's why I like him better as a commander. So I have switched my Arthus deck to Eddie when you're in a method 2 strategy, you should be able to just take out a couple of cards that specifically fit with this commander. And the, Portcullis would be one. That was a card that I specifically used with Arthus because I thought it was a neat fit with the Manifest. Conjurer's Closet was another one that worked with the Manifest that has nothing to do with this guy. So I took those out. So pretty easy switch there because it is a Method 2 deck. Another deck that wasn't really a Method 2 deck, but it kind of is, it was my Kinzu deck. And as I talked about, again, I'm trying to get away from those monolith commanders, which, Method 1 monolith commanders, those sort of go hand in hand. So again, I'm talking about my personal decks here, but I'm talking about deck building strategy and the things I'm personally doing, right? I'm putting my money where my mouth is. When I say these things, I don't just say them for, clicks and views. I'm saying them because I'm actually doing these things. Kinzu, I find to actually be sort of a monolith commander. When I played that deck, I very much wanted my Kinzu to be in play before I really did anything, and I just don't love that play style. I don't love the play style of I'm sitting here, maybe I'm ramping, and I'm doing some stuff, but I'm not really doing what my deck wants to be doing until my commander's in play. I didn't love that, and I believe I talked about how I didn't love that, and that deck was my most monolith deck of all my personal decks. So I decided to switch it out, and funny enough, I switched back to sort of my original commander, which is Nadir, Agent of Dusk now, and you're looking at those commanders and you're like, they don't seem very similar. Funny enough, Nadir was in the 99, so they are kind of similar, and I put Kinzu in the 99 of the Nadir deck. The partner here is Keskit. I actually didn't really even care to have a partner. I could have easily done a partner without here, but I just had a Keskit sitting in my box, and what do you know? It's a sack outlet. Why not throw that in the command zone, right? The deck is built around Nadir, though. I've always loved Nadir. He's a fantastic commander, I think, and also fits in the 99 so many decks, because whenever a token you control leaves the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on him. So, of course, any token, treasure tokens, you name it, works with Nadir, and it's a leaves the battlefield, doesn't have to be a dies, and also he has a leaves the battlefield, which is really important. When he leaves the battlefield, create a number of 1/1 green elf warrior creature tokens equal to his power. And of course, the tokens you're making then feed into the first ability when you get them back and all of that. I'm not going to get too much into how you build a Nadir deck. You can go check out one of my original deck decks on my channel was my Nadir and Miara deck, which was an actual deck of mine, my mono black elf deck. And that was more a mono black elf tribal deck. Here, I'm not doing that really at all. It is more a token and sacrifice theme, but it's just funny how it worked out where I had taken that deck apart, and the shell for that deck, because a lot of the cards from that deck worked with my Kuon deck, which was my second mono black deck that I put together. So I used the majority of those cards for my Kuon deck. I didn't love my Kuon deck. I liked it, but it was kind of oppressive to play against because it's one of those sort of forced sacrifice strategies that not super fun to play against. So I played a few games with it, took it apart. Then I switched to Kinzu. I had no mono black deck for a couple months. I saw Kinzu, and sure enough, that worked with the majority of cards that were in my Kuon deck because a mono black sacrifice theme. Again, that's why it very much fits into the Method 2 category. And I basically used 90% of the cards from that deck for my Kinzu deck. And then again, now I'm switching back to Nadir, except this time with Keskit. And again, didn't have to switch out too many cards. The only thing I had to do was I had to put a little bit more token creation in there because, of course, my commander wants there to be tokens in play. I can make the deck work just by sacrificing my commander to make tokens, and then those tokens then get sacrificed to put counters on my commander, right? That's why he's such a great commander and such a great build around. I did add some more. So I would say, again, 75-80% of the deck is the same as my Kinzu deck. I'm still using all those cards that I really love so much, like Devouring Strasses and stuff like that. Obviously, because I'm in a sack outlet theme, that's definitely going to fit. But I threw in a few cards that do the token theme because that works with Nadir as well. So my Kinzu deck is now my Nadir deck. My original Method 2 decks, and again, before I even came up with this concept of having, whether or not you're actually building around your commander or not so much, or Method 3, which is I'm not building around my commander at all, and I don't ever plan on casting it, I just want the colors, which I find a lot of 5-color decks do often, or at least they used to for sure. My Dragonlord Damoka deck was my original deck that was doing that, and I didn't even realize it was just a combo deck. I just threw a bunch of white-green combos together that I wanted to do. It was mostly built around Painter's Servant turning everything black and Urborg making everyone's lands into swamps. And of course, for that reason, I didn't have to have Dragon Lord Damoka as my commander. It's just the one that fit. You know, it was helpful. It was a useful tool. I think every single time I played that deck, I did cast my commander. It was a good blocker. It gained life. I mostly chose it as the commander because it didn't allow my opponents to cast spells on my turn. So, of course, they couldn't break up the things I was trying to do on my turn. I switched to Malira, and that was the first deck where I did this, where I switched commanders because I didn't need Dragon Lord Damoka as the commander, and that's the one I talked about in my personal decks video, and I talked about the reasons why I switched to Malira. I found I was almost starting to do too much in the deck. I originally had thought that I wasn't doing enough in my Dragon Lord Damoka deck, and then I switched to Malira, so I started doing more, like I did the Phyrexian on life combo and stuff like that, and then I started doing sort of these damagey themes like Cyclone, and I started doing too much, and it wasn't working. So I switched again, and this time I switched to Kellen, Daring Traveler, which you look at all three of those commanders and they have nothing to do with each other, but this one I find actually works the best. So 1 and a white human fairy scout 2/3 is an adventure commander. The adventure side, 1 green mana, sorcery adventure, create X map tokens, where X is 1 plus the number of opponents who control an artifact. So you're going to get at least 1 if your opponents have an artifact, which usually they do early in the game. They're going to play a mana rock. You're going to get a couple map tokens. And of course, map tokens are exploring, and exploring works good. And it, funny enough, actually works even better than I had originally hoped. I hadn't planned on using the adventure side that much, but man, it works great. Like, this is actually a great commander. I should talk about it in a separate video because there's so much you can do here. 1 mana, I make some map tokens, and then my commander goes to exile, and then I cast it later, and it comes into play. And of course, the map tokens I can use on my commander if I want to. And I dig into my deck, right? That kind of stuff is good in a method 2 strategy, especially if you're trying to assemble some combos. You're digging through your deck, right? Exploring, looting, all that kind of stuff works good when you're digging for certain cards. And then the other side, the creature side, when you actually play your commander, when he attacks, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card with mana value 3 or less, put it into your hand. Otherwise, you may put it into your graveyard. So again, I'm digging through cards. And if you have a lot of 3 mana value cards in your deck, it's extra good because now it's card advantage. Now I can put stuff actually in my hand. And of course, the most important creature in that deck, Painter's Servant, is indeed a creature with mana value 3 or less. So that I can put in my hand. I can put my Nentuko Blightcutter, another really important creature in the deck, into my hand. And I got a Wood Elves, and I got a Reclamation Sage, and I got an Eternal Witness, and just go down the list of really great creatures that I already had in the deck. And I added a few more because now I'm doing this 3 mana value creature theme. So now I just throw a couple more 3 mana value, just great creatures that work in any commander deck anyway. Why not throw them in there? Because now it fits the theme of what you're doing. And my commander is just a great assist. Again, this is a fantastic commander for that method 2 strategy where, I'm not doing map tokens. I'm not really doing, the second thing is just good, right? Both of those abilities are just handy abilities to give you value. Dig into your deck, maybe put stuff in your graveyard. Funny enough, I have a few threshold cards in the deck where putting stuff in my graveyard actually matters. There's a lot of neat things that you can do with this commander, and it's a great assist commander. This is one of those commanders that I love for a method 2 deck where he's giving me value. And he's not doing something super specific. So for that reason, he's very easy to use as a commander to assist in what you're already doing. Very happy with this guy as the commander for what used to be my Dragon Lord Damoka deck. Next up, my Sopina deck, and this is a case where I actually switched colors. So my Sopina deck, of course, is my Sacrifice Lands deck, and there was a couple of things I didn't love about it. What I realized is my Sopina deck is actually a Method 3 deck. Sopina has nothing to do with the deck at all. The only thing I had put in the deck that has anything to do with that commander was Anointed Procession, so it makes more clue tokens. And I also had other things that made tokens. There's a little bit of a sub-theme of tokens in there. I didn't love it. I didn't love that I very easily could go the entire game without ever casting my commander. I had done so. And so I didn't love that I had a commander that really had nothing. Again, it's kind of card advantage, I guess. That's the only reason I chose it. And it's also, not very popular. But I didn't love that it had nothing. It didn't fit my deck at all. And I didn't love that. And I also kind of didn't love that I was doing a Boros Lands deck, which is apparently not a very exactly unpopular theme. A lot of people are doing that. I've had a lot of people. I have patrons that have the same kind of deck, just with different commanders. I have gotten messages from lots of people that said they're doing a Boros Lands deck, but with a different commander. And I'm like, Maybe this isn't as unique of a theme as I thought. And I started thinking that maybe I would want to switch colors as well as commanders. And I decided to do a white blue theme because I thought there was a lot of really neat blue cards that fit that theme as well. I mean, the version that I'm playing is more of a I want there to be less lands in play and take advantage of that. So Moloko the Clouded Mirror, of course, that's not a sacrifice lands theme, but it is picking up lands. It does fit that theme, right? So that's a card that I was like, yeah, that would work great. So Devi Sage is a funny old card that actually is a blue card that is sacrificing lands. So of course that fits. There's a lot of neat cards in that deck that are going to work in the white-blue scenario rather than the white-red scenario. A lot of great red cards I had in my Sopina version that unfortunately I won't be able to use, but obviously I took all the white ones and then just added the blue ones, and my commander is going to be now Nambi, Esteemed Speaker, which again, doesn't seem at all like the right commander for that deck. But funny enough, Nambi is one that I did on my channel already. I did it in my Underwhelming Commanders video, I believe, and the theme that I did there is actually why it fits. When it enters the battlefield, you may return another target creature you control to owner's hand. If you do, gain life equal to the creature's mana value. And again, that is the value, the assist. It does lots of stuff. There are actually I wasn't planning on using that ability that much, but more and more it's becoming relevant. There are a lot of creatures like my scholarship sponsor, which is an ETB creature that I want to pick up and use again. So that works a lot. I ended up actually going in a little bit of a life game direction because, of course, cards like Claws of Gix gain you life. So getting life gain triggers is actually really easy in the deck. Zurin Orb, again, you're sacrificing your lands and also gaining life. So I realized, hey, I actually can very easily gain life in this deck. So I'll put a Well Lost Dreams in the deck. So I went with a little bit of a life gain theme. I do have some life gain trigger stuff. Of course, gaining life in a commander game is always good. But the main reason I built around this commander is because of the, I would say, what is the main ability here? 1 white, blue, tap, discard a legendary card, draw 2 cards. And of course, the theme I went with in the Underwhelming Commanders video was discarding legendary lands. That's very easy to do. You don't have to fill your deck with a bunch of legendary creatures, although again, just like with the Kellen deck where I'm like, okay, well, I'll just throw a few more 3 mana value creatures in here just to make my commander's ability a little more usable. Here, I'm like, okay, well, I'll throw in a Lauren of the Third Path because I need artifact and enchantment removal already, but because it's legendary later in the game, if I just need cards, I can discard it and draw 2 cards, right? So I did do that a little bit, but mostly legendary lands. I got lots of legendary lands in the deck. I already had like Flagstones of Trocare, right? I already had some of those. So it's very easy for me to discard lands into my graveyard and draw 2 cards. And of course, that deck a little bit more is not just sacrificing lands, but also discarding lands. I'm doing a little bit more of a discard theme as well. So this is a case where I switched commanders, but also very much switched what the entire deck is doing. Not the entire deck. Basically, all the white cards are the same. I just added a bunch of blue cards. While I'm on the subject of all my decks, I am actually putting together a deck. My AO, the Dawn Sky. This is not a case where I'm changing it, but this is, I thought this would be a good place to talk about this. I am actually finally putting this deck together in paper. I posted the video on my channel, maybe almost 2 years ago. I had made this deck. I absolutely loved it. I playtested it digitally, right? I usually almost always playtest my decks. Well, I do always playtest my decks in a digital format before I put them together in paper so that I know I actually like what's going on. And the idea I came up with here is an artifact theme because, of course, AO the Dawn Sky says, look at the top 7 cards of your library, put any number of non-land permanent cards with total mana value 4 or less from among them onto the battlefield. So if you have a 0 mana value thing, it's a freebie, right? So I can get a 4-drop. I can get something that costs 4, but then if there's a couple zeros there, I can get those for free. That's just free card advantage, right? So I went with an artifact theme with AO. And of course, the issue there being, and why I had never put it together in paper before, a lot of those 0 mana artifacts are expensive, right? A Jeweled Lotus, pretty pricey. Mox Opal, pretty pricey, right? And I'm actually not getting those cards. I decided, you know what? I really love this deck and I really wanted to put together in paper. So again, maybe I can just switch it up a little. And again, this is another deck building strategy thing. It's something that you can do maybe to save money. I'm not a huge budget guy, but I definitely don't really want to spend $300 on a card. Certainly my wife is not a big fan of that either. What I decided to do, funny enough, is the egg strategy that I talked about a few months back. I'll just do that a little bit more. I'm already doing the artifact sacrifice theme, right? And of course, all those eggs effects are 1 mana value for the most part. They're all 1 mana value. So it's not quite as good as having the 0 mana value, but it does work. And obviously cracking all those eggs, that obviously works with the sacrifice artifact theme and, all of that kind of stuff. And I already had Second Sunrise in the deck because I need ways to get back my commander. So the sacrificing artifacts works with the sacrificing of my commander. I'm really excited to put this together in paper, finally, and I will finally actually be playing with it. I'm looking forward to it. Last deck I'm going to talk about here is my Rain Academy Chancellor deck, which funny enough, I took apart and talked about that in my personal decks video, how my Rain Academy Chancellor deck was the only deck that I stopped playing, and I am putting it back together. I was thinking about it the other day, and again, this is a deck building strategy thing, and I'm giving you guys some ideas where maybe you have a deck that you're kind of getting bored with, or maybe you have a deck where, again, it's very much a monolith deck you built around your commander, and if your commander doesn't get into play, then it's not going to work out so well for you. Let's try going in a different direction so you don't have to take that deck apart. And that is very much the case with Rain, which is why I wanted to talk about it here. So 2 in a blue, human wizard, 1/1. Whenever you or a permanent you control becomes the target of a spell or ability controlled by one of your opponents, you may draw a card. If Rain is enchanted, you get to draw another card. So you get to draw 2. Pretty darn good. The way I had built this deck was I built a monolith deck. It was my own fault. I blame myself. That's why I wasn't enjoying this deck at all. And you absolutely do not need to build Rain as a monolith deck. And in fact, again, this is a very much a commander that can just be an assist. Any mono blue strategy, you could use Rain as your commander, and just anytime your opponents target any of your stuff, you get the draw card, right? Which is pretty good. Again, a commander that very easily fits in the 99 of any deck. If you're doing an aura theme in blue, throw this in the 99. If you're doing even a wizard tribal deck, I would say this would be a great fit in the 99 because it's just great card advantage. But I built the deck so that I have to get my Rain, and then I have to get an aura on it, and then I spend all my time trying to redirect things to target my stuff so that I can draw cards. Bad strategy. Demo, what were you thinking? I don't know what I was thinking. That was a bad strategy to build the deck that way. However, I decided, okay, I have my Rain and all these cards that do work, right? All these blue auras that I'll never use in any other deck. I have my Spellskite sitting there, and funny enough, I actually ordered the Secret Lair, I think, or some special edition one that looked really, really cool, that just sitting in my box, not getting used. Why don't I come up with something different to do with my Rain deck? And what I started doing, and what I should have originally done, right? And again, this is deck building 101 here, guys, for me. And I've been trying to do this a lot lately, where instead of just showing you, here's a deck. I built the deck. Here you go, guys. Play it if you want. I'm trying to go through the strategy of the process by which I go through for building decks, right? And what I should have done is I should have looked at Rain and said to myself, I want to build a Rain deck. That's what I did. I love this card. I really like the art as well. And I wanted to build a Rain deck. It's a very nostalgic card for me as well. What I should have done is looked at this and said, okay, I want to build this deck. How will I go about it? And of course, you want to be doing auras here. That, of course, you're really wasting the value of your commander. If you're not doing auras, it's still good, but getting the double card draw is even better. So I want to do a blue aura theme. So what am I going to do to actually make that work? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just look up all the auras that I have in blue in the commander format. That's what I should have done originally. Rather than coming up with a strategy to just draw the maximum amount of cards off my commander, which I don't think is particularly great. Instead, I'm going to look at all the auras available in the commander format and try to come up with a theme that I can build around there that fits with blue auras. And there is a couple. The first one I came up with is, of course, a lot of blue auras are giving hexproof or shroud or phasing. And wouldn't you know it, I was already playing a bunch of those in this deck. So I thought, okay, well, if I just stick to that theme, because I want to be doing that anyway, I want to put like some shroud or some hexproof thing on my commander so it doesn't die so easily. My opponents can't target it. But then again, that doesn't work great because then they can't target it, so I don't get the card draw right. Again, it's almost a little bit of a non-bow in a way, which is kind of weird. You do have to be careful of that when you're building this commander. But what you can do with that theme is you can just put a lot of great creatures in the deck, right? Again, that's why Rain is a great assist for doing that. You can just mono blue good stuff creatures if you want. You can put creatures in there that are maybe hate bears that your opponents are going to want to target, and then throw hexproof shroud on them. So it's sort of a win-win situation where if my opponent kills it, I get to draw 2 cards. If I manage to get the hexproof or the shroud on there, then I get to keep it around. So either way, you can think of it as a win-win scenario. Fate Spinner, you know, like there's a card that my opponents are not going to like, that they're going to want to get off the battlefield, and they're going to want to target it with their removal, and they're not going to be able to because I give it a hexproof. And if they are able to, then I get to draw 2 cards, right? That kind of scenario I was thinking. But I was thinking, it doesn't sound like a lot of fun to play against. I'm really in the zone of, I just want to play fun, interesting commander decks right now. And maybe I'm a little less interested with winning. So what I decided is to go with a different theme, and another commonality with blue auras, and you guys might even have thought of one already, is the untapping theme. There's a lot of auras that will untap your creatures, particularly repeatedly, right? So Pemin's Aura obviously is one that gets used quite a bit. Freed from the Real is another one that gets used quite a bit in the commander format, of course, because it can very easily untap creatures. A lot of infinite scenarios there. I didn't put any in this deck, of course, because there's not a lot of blue creatures that are tapping for mana. There are a few, though. So I will say there is one particular thing which is kind of funny that I did here, but I'm not going to get too much into it. I'll just say I went with the untapping theme. I have auras in the deck that can untap my creatures, and that actually does kind of work with my Rain, because again, one of the things I sort of did before was a little bit of a wizard tribal thing. So I had a Zami in the deck, right? And a Zami, of course, wants me to tap down my commander to draw a card, because of course my commander's just sitting there. It's not doing anything. So why not tap it down to draw a card, because I'm just using that static ability. And if I have a Freed from the Real on it, now it becomes 1 blue mana, draw a card, right? Because I can untap it, tap it to draw a card, and so on and so forth, right? So that works pretty well. Also, Galecaster Colossus, same thing, right? If I get my Galecaster Colossus in play, it becomes pay 1 blue mana, return a permanent to hand, which is pretty fantastic. But I didn't want to just do that. Again, I don't want to rely on just a couple of cards in my deck. So I decided, again, for me, I'm just really on a nostalgia thing here. And this is maybe my nostalgia deck. I decided to throw in creatures in the deck that want to be untapped, sure, but more importantly, don't untap during your untap step, right? That's certainly a creature that you want to untap. And if I go way, way back to the origins of me playing Magic, there is a card, Leviathan, which, again, by today's standards, because of the power creep, looks pretty awful. But when I first started playing the game of Magic, the guy that taught me how to play the game of Magic, he had this card, and it just looked like the most scary, imposing creature you've ever seen in your life. I mean, it was. For a long time, this was the scariest creature you could possibly play in the game. 5 blue, 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 blue. So 9 mana is a lot. Leviathan 10/10. With trample. So it's a 10/10 with trample, which again, by today's standard, even just a 10/10 with trample for 9 mana, people will be like, oh, that's not very good. But there's also a whole lot of bad things on top of that. It comes into play tapped and doesn't untap during your untap step. So that's not great. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may sacrifice 2 islands if you do untap it. So of course, that's all, who cares, right? Because of course, we can put the Freed from the Real on any of my untapping effects, right? That's why it works in this deck. I'm going to put my untapper on here so that those first 2 drawbacks aren't drawbacks at all. I can just pay 1 blue mana and untap them, right? However, also, Leviathan can't attack unless you sacrifice 2 islands. He's a very hungry dude, right? I mean, look at the size of that maw he's got there. So still not great. I still got to sacrifice 2 islands every time he attacks, but he's going to be my finisher, or one of my finishers in the deck. I have a lot of creatures that don't want to untap on my untap step that I will be using those blue auras to untap them. That's the theme of the deck. I know it's not the greatest, most menacing theme ever, but it's fun and interesting and very nostalgic for me. So it's sort of my nostalgia deck. My Rain Academy Chancellor deck, I decided to put back together because I just got away from the monolith part, was the part that was making it really unfun to play and making it so it just, I was spinning my wheels a lot and I wasn't doing a whole bunch. Here now I have a more fringe theme, but more a theme that I don't need my commander in play, and I can do a lot of interesting things, and it's a lot more fun. And so I ended up putting my Rain Academy Chancellor deck together again because I avoided the monolith theme and went with something a little more interesting. So again, another lesson of the day from this video. If you have a monolith commander deck, and again, you're finding that you cast that commander and if someone kills it right away, especially if a play group that knows exactly what you're going to be doing, maybe get away from that. Maybe get away from that whole monolith strategy and make it so that you don't really need your commander in play. Your commander fits the strategy of what you're doing. Again, like my rain deck, of course, because I'm doing blue auras, my commander very much fits the theme of what I'm doing, but I'm doing this very interesting thing that doesn't necessarily require my commander to be in play, right? So maybe some deck building advice there for you that I have done that might work to make your deck run a little smoother and maybe be a little more fun as well. That is it for today, though, and thanks for tuning in.